September 11th, 2017. A construction worker in southern Russia picks up a smartphone lying on a cracked sidewalk. He swipes through the photo gallery. What he sees next will haunt him forever: images of a man smiling while holding a severed human hand, body parts arranged like some twisted still life. Within hours, the internet explodes. Russia's cannibal couple, they called them. 30 victims. Jars of human flesh. A story so horrifying, it gave people chills in minutes. I'm taking you through 10 of the most shocking cases, from viral myths that exploded online to crimes that rewrote national laws. Some of these you've heard of. The names that made headlines. The cases that spawned documentaries. Others have been buried by time or geography, or the simple fact that the truth was too uncomfortable to keep discussing. But all of them will stay with you, because once you understand how trust can be weaponized, how love can curdle into something lethal, you'll never look at family dynamics quite the same way again. Quick question before we continue: what time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious, who's watching this at 2 a.m. versus during their lunch break? Now, let's start where that construction worker in Russia did, with a phone full of nightmares and a story that the internet couldn't get straight. That smartphone belonged to Dmitry Baksheev, age 35, and his wife, Natalia Baksheeva, age 42. Police traced it to a decaying dormitory room on the grounds of a former military academy in Krasnodar. The place reeked. Neighbors had been complaining about the smell for weeks. When investigators pushed open the door, they found a scene that seemed ripped from a horror film. Knives, plastic bags, phones stashed inside the refrigerator, and floating in saline solution, preserved like some grotesque science experiment, fragments of human tissue. Within hours, telegram channels lit up. Russian tabloids went into overdrive. 30 victims, they screamed. Decades of murder. Recipes for cooking human flesh. The story metastasized across borders, translated into a dozen languages, shared millions of times. People wanted to believe it, needed to believe it, because if this couple had killed 30 people, if they'd been eating their victims for years, then this was history-making depravity. This was legend. Except it wasn't true. Forensic teams drained pipes, scoured nearby woods, brought in cadaver dogs trained to detect decomposition. They tested every piece of tissue, every bone fragment, every suspicious stain in that apartment. And what they found, what DNA analysis and tissue testing definitively proved, was that all the remains belonged to one person, one victim. Elena Vakrusheva, a 35-year-old waitress who'd been drinking with the couple just days before her death. One murder, not 30. One body, not a mass grave. But by the time the facts caught up, the myth had already circled the globe. On February 22, 2019, Natalia was convicted of incitement to murder and sentenced to 10 years in a penal colony, plus 18 months in standard prison. 4 months later, Dmitry was convicted of murder and desecration of a corpse, 12 years and 2 months in maximum security with compulsory psychiatric treatment. He died of untreated diabetes in custody less than a year later, on February 16, 2020. The Russian Investigative Committee publicly denied any evidence of mass killings or cannibalism beyond that single murder. But search Russian cannibal couple today, and you'll still find articles claiming 30 victims. You'll still see those photos circulating with captions that ignore the forensic truth. Because once a story goes viral, once it becomes legend, facts become optional. The internet doesn't do corrections well. It does horror exceptionally. That's the first lesson. Digital frenzy can eclipse reality so completely that even investigators can't claw the truth back. But here's the second lesson, and it's more disturbing. Even when we strip away the mythology, even when we reduce it to just one victim, what remains is still a couple who murdered together, dismembered together, and kept souvenirs of their crime like vacation photos. The exaggeration was false. The evil wasn't. Now let's travel back a few decades and across an ocean, to a different kind of myth, one built not on internet rumors, but on a carefully constructed lie about love. In 1977, Gerald Armand Gallegos was 31 years old, with a rap sheet that should have been a red flag visible from space violence, assault, a childhood marked by his father's execution in Mississippi's gas chamber. Then, he met Charlene Williams, 21, intelligent, blonde, eager to please. They married quickly, and soon, they were hunting together. Here's how it worked. Charlene was the lure. Friendly, disarming, unthreatening. She'd approach young women at Sacramento malls, at Nevada fairgrounds, outside movie theaters. Hey, want to come to a party? Or, we're looking for models for a photo shoot, interested? Gerald would be waiting in the van. The offer would sound innocent until the door slid shut. The van became a mobile prison. Victims were transported to remote locations, held as sex slaves, tortured, and murdered when Gerald decided he was finished with them. Between 1,978 and 1,980, the confirmed body count climbed. Kippy Vaught, 16, and Rhonda Scheffler, 17. Brenda Judd, 14, and Sandra Colley, 13 children grabbed from a fairground. Stacy Redican and Karen Twiggs, both 17. Linda Aguilar, 21. Virginia Mokel, 34. Then on November 2nd, 1,980, they abducted engaged couple, Craig Miller, 22, and Mary Beth Sowers, 21, from a Sacramento mall parking lot. But this time, someone saw. Another couple witnessed the abduction and managed to note the license plate before the van disappeared. That single detail, 7 characters on a metal rectangle, unraveled everything. Police tracked the van across state lines. On November 17th, 1,980, FBI agents and U.S. Marshals cornered Gerald and Charlene in Omaha, Nebraska. Charlene cut a deal, testified against Gerald, painted herself as a victim, coerced and terrified, unable to escape his control. In exchange for her cooperation, she received a sentence of 16 years and 8 months. She walked out of prison in 1997, changed her name, and disappeared into obscurity. Gerald wasn't so lucky, or depending on your perspective, got exactly what he deserved. Death sentences in California in 1983, then Nevada in 1984. His execution was stayed pending appeal, but cancer didn't wait for the courts. He died in prison in 2002. Here's what haunts investigators to this day. Charlene's testimony. The way she framed herself as powerless, because the evidence witness statements, her active participation, the way she smiled while luring victims suggested something darker. Not a hostage, a partner. Complicity dressed up as romance. Love as an excuse for murder. The love van became a term that still appears in criminal psychology courses. A case study in how codependent relationships can evolve into hunting partnerships. How one person's pathology can activate another's. How a van, something as mundane as a vehicle you'd use for a camping trip, can become a death chamber on wheels when 2 people decide that other human beings are disposable. But not all killers hide behind myths or mobile prisons. Some hide in plain sight, right in the heartland, behind white picket fences and Sunday church services, in places where neighbors wave and nobody asks too many questions. Mooresville, Missouri. Farmland that stretches to the horizon. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where handshake deals still mean something, where Ray and Faye Copeland looked exactly like what they were supposed to be, elderly farmers in their 70s, weathered by decades of hard work, pillars of rural American life. Ray wore overalls and a straw hat. Faye kept a tidy house and quilted in her spare time. If you passed them at the local diner, you'd nod politely and think nothing of it. But between 1,986 and 1,989, drifters started vanishing. Ray had a system, and it was brutally efficient. He'd recruit transient men from soup kitchens and homeless shelters, guys with nowhere else to go and no one checking on them. The pitch was simple. Farm work, cash under the table, no questions asked. These men didn't know local banking, didn't have established credit. so Ray would help them open accounts, except he wasn't being charitable. He was creating financial instruments. He'd use their accounts to write bad checks for cattle at auctions. Buy livestock, resell it fast, pocket the profit, and let the checks bounce. By the time the bank noticed, Ray would claim ignorance, just a mistake, just a misunderstanding. And the drifter? Well, that drifter would be gone. Literally. Dennis Murphy, Wayne Warner, Jimmy Dale Harvey, John Freeman, Paul Cowart. 5 men who came to the Copeland farm looking for honest work and ended up in shallow graves, each one shot in the back of the head with a .22 caliber rifle. Clean, efficient, executioner style. The whole operation might have continued if not for Jack McCormick. He was supposed to be victim number 6. Instead, he witnessed Ray burying one of the bodies, managed to escape, and went straight to police. Detectives descended on farmland where Ray had worked. They brought shovels and ground-penetrating radar, and they started digging. Inside the Copeland farmhouse, they found the rifle ballistics matched perfectly to the bullets pulled from victims' skulls. They found a handwritten list with names, some crossed out in Faye's neat handwriting, a scorecard, a ledger of death, and then they found the quilt. Picture this. A handmade quilt, the kind you'd see at a county fair or draped over a guest bed. Except this one was pieced together from clothing scraps. Victims' clothing. Faye had taken fabric from the men her husband murdered and stitched it into a keepsake. Investigators standing in that farmhouse, holding that quilt, realizing what they were looking at. It's the kind of moment that ends careers or defines them. Ray was convicted in January 1990 of 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. He died of natural causes in prison in May 1993 before the state could execute him. Faye was convicted in 1991 and also sentenced to death, making them the oldest couple ever sent to death row in American history. Her sentence was commuted in 1999 due to age and deteriorating health. She was paroled to a nursing home in 2002 and died of a stroke a year later. Evil wears many faces. Sometimes it wears a farmhouse apron and keeps a quilt at the foot of the bed. Now, let's jump across the Atlantic to London, 2017. Wimbledon, affluent, picturesque, the kind of neighborhood where property values are measured in millions, and scandals are usually about planning permits or parking disputes. Sophie Leonet, 21 years old, arrives from France with a dream. She's going to be an au pair, care for children, improve her English, maybe see some of Europe while she's at it. The job seems perfect. The employers, Sabrina Kouida, a French-Algerian fashion designer, and her partner Wissam Midouni, seem welcoming at first. But behind the polished veneer, behind the designer clothes and the well-appointed home, Sabrina and Wissam shared something toxic, a delusion. Sabrina was convinced, absolutely, irrationally convinced, that her ex-boyfriend, Mark Walton, a member of the Irish boy band Boyzone, was spying on her, and she decided Sophie was the spy. It started slow. Confiscated passport, confiscated phone, questions that turned into interrogations, starvation, beatings, hours of accusations, all recorded on video. 8-hour sessions where Sophie, exhausted and terrified, was forced to confess to conspiracies that didn't exist, forced to admit she was working for Mark Walton, feeding him information, betraying the family. Wissam participated fully, not a bystander, not a reluctant accomplice, but an active partner in the delusion. On September 18th and 19th, 2017, they tortured Sophie in the bathroom. Then they drowned her, and instead of calling police, instead of facing what they'd done, they made a decision that speaks to how deeply shared psychosis had taken root. They would burn the evidence. They dragged Sophie's body into the backyard, piled wood over it, and set it on fire. In Wimbledon, in a residential neighborhood, the smell of burning flesh mixed with lighter fluid, smoke rising into the suburban sky. Neighbors noticed. Firefighters were called. Police arrived. Sophie's charred remains were found in the garden. The interrogation videos were recovered. At trial in 2018 at the Old Bailey, both Sabrina and Awisam tried to blame each other. Both were convicted. Both received life sentences with minimum terms of 30 years. Appeals in 2019 failed. The case forced Britain to reckon with coercive control, how psychological abuse can be just as deadly as physical violence, how two people can reinforce each other's delusions until murder seems logical. If you're still watching, drop a like, and tell me what's the weather like where you are. Seriously, I want to know. Are you watching this in the sunshine, or bundled up at midnight? Let me know in the comments. Now we cross back over the Atlantic to Canada, June 2009. Kingston Mills, Ontario. A black Nissan Sentra is found submerged nose down in a canal lock, water pouring through the broken windows. Inside are 4 bodies, 3 teenage sisters, Zainab, 19, Saha, 17, and Geeti, 13, and 50-year-old Rona Amir Muhammad, the first wife in a polygamous marriage. At first, police consider it a tragic accident. Maybe the driver lost control. Maybe it was late, dark, unfamiliar roads. Then they find the Lexus SUV, damage to the front end. Forensic analysis shows the Nissan didn't drive into the water, it was rammed, deliberately, with enough force to send it plunging into the canal. This wasn't an accident. This was execution. Muhammad Shafia, the patriarch, had built a successful business after immigrating to Canada from Afghanistan via Dubai. But success in business didn't mean acceptance of Western values. Inside the family, he ruled with absolute control. The daughters were monitored constantly: curfews, surveillance, restrictions on clothing, friendships, any hint of independence. Rona, the first wife, was considered an embarrassment because she couldn't have children. Tuba Yahya, the second wife, enabled everything, enforcing Muhammad's rules with the same iron grip. The daughters wanted normal lives. Zainab had a boyfriend. Sahar wore makeup. Geeti was rebellious, pushing boundaries, refusing to submit. And for wanting autonomy, for daring to be Canadian teenagers, they were branded filthy. A dishonor to the family, a stain that required cleansing. Police recorded conversations. Muhammad's voice, clear and unrepentant. They had dishonored the family, and deadly punishment was justified. The plan was methodical. Tuba and the couple's son, Hamid, participated fully. They lured the women into the Nissan under false pretenses, used the Lexus to ram it into the water, then watched it sink. 4 lives extinguished to preserve a patriarch's twisted sense of honor. On January 29, 2012, all 3, Muhammad Shafia, Tuba Yahya, and Hamed Shafia, were convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no parole eligibility for 25 years. Appeals in 2016 failed. A Supreme Court bid failed. As of 2025, they remain incarcerated. The case reshaped Canada's discourse on so-called honor violence and forced a national conversation about where cultural traditions end and universal human rights begin. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Cultural context doesn't justify murder. It explains motive, but it doesn't excuse action. 4 women died because a father, mother, and brother decided that family reputation mattered more than human life. Sometimes evil doesn't creep, it explodes. Pike County, Ohio. April 21st and 22nd, 2016. 8 members of the Roden family are executed across 4 different properties, farmhouses scattered across rural land where everyone knows everyone and nobody locks their doors. Chris Roden, Sr., 40. Gary Roden, 38. Dana Roden, 37. Hannah Roden, 19. Christopher Roden, Jr., 16. Clarence, Frankie, Roden, 20. Hannah Gilly, 20. Kenneth Roden, 44. 8 people, most shot multiple times while they slept. Some showed signs of bruising, they'd been beaten before being killed. 3 young children were left alive, physically unharmed, sleeping in the same rooms where their parents were murdered. This wasn't random. This wasn't passion. This was strategy. The investigation took 2 years, one of the most complex and expensive in Ohio history. And when arrests finally came in November 2018, the suspects weren't strangers. They were the Wagner family, George Billy Wagner III, and his wife Angela, along with their sons George Wagner IV and Jake Wagner. The motive? Custody of Jake's daughter with 9-year-old Hannah Roden. Jake wanted full custody. Hannah refused. So the Wagner family decided that if they couldn't have the child legally, they'd eliminate anyone who stood in their way. Not just Hannah, everyone. Anyone who might fight for custody. Anyone who might testify. Anyone who might connect them to the crime. The plan was methodical to the point of obsession. Homemade silencers manufactured in their garage. Forged custody documents prepared in advance. Surveillance conducted for weeks to learn the Rodens' routines. And coordinated nighttime raids, with the family splitting into teams. The children were spared deliberately. This wasn't about bloodlust, it was about acquisition. Jake's daughter needed to survive. And leaving other children alive? That created the illusion that whoever did this had boundaries, had mercy, was something other than what they actually were. A family that had turned murder into a coordinated military operation. Angela pleaded guilty in 2021 to conspiracy and related charges 30 years. Jake pleaded guilty to 8 counts of aggravated murder, agreed to testify against his father and brother, and received 8 consecutive life sentences with eligibility for parole after 32 years. His testimony helped convict George IV, who in 2022 received 8 consecutive life terms without parole. Billy Wagner's trial remains pending as of 2025, delayed multiple times, the legal machinery grinding slowly, while the families of 8 victims wait for something resembling closure. Obsession plus entitlement equals massacre. When people decide they have a right to something, a child, a relationship, control, and the law says no, some people accept reality, others burn it down. Now, let's rewind to December 2000. Wichita, Kansas. The holiday season, Christmas lights going up, shopping malls packed. The kind of comfortable American winter where the biggest worry is whether you've finished your gift list. Then, on December 7th, Andrew Schreiber gets carjacked by 2 brothers who force him to withdraw cash from multiple ATMs at gunpoint. He survives. Police take a report. It feels like an isolated incident. 4 days later, December 11th, librarian Anne Walenta is forced to withdraw money, then shot in her own driveway. She survives long enough to give police descriptions of her attackers, 2 black men, young, one taller than the other. She dies from her injuries weeks later, but her testimony sets the clock ticking. December 14th. A suburban home where 5 young professionals are spending a quiet evening. Jason Beeford, Brad Haker, Aaron Sander, Heather Muller, and a woman known in court records only as H.G. To protect her identity, Reginald and Jonathan Carr kick in the door. What follows is 5 hours of methodical terror. Rape, torture, forced sexual humiliation, designed to degrade and dehumanize. They ransack the house, steal electronics, jewelry, ATM cards. They force the victims to provide PIN numbers. Then they load all 5 into vehicles and drive them to a snow-covered soccer field on the outskirts of town. Picture it. Freezing December night, temperature well below freezing, wind cutting across empty fields. The Carr brothers force all 5 to kneel in the snow. Then they execute them one by one. Heather Muller, Aaron Sander, and Brad Haker die instantly from gunshots to the head. Jason Beeford is shot and left to bleed out in the cold. H.G. is shot in the head. But H.G. was wearing a metal hair barrette. The bullet struck it, deflected, and instead of penetrating her skull, it carved a furrow across her scalp. Catastrophic bleeding, traumatic injury, but not fatal. She plays dead while the Carr brothers drive over the bodies with their vehicle to make sure everyone's gone, then watches them leave. Then, naked, bleeding from a head wound, in sub-zero temperatures, she walks 1 mile through snow and dark to the nearest farmhouse. She pounds on the door. Someone answers. She survives. Her testimony, combined with ATM footage, ballistic matches, and stolen property recovered from the brothers' possession, sealed the case. Both were arrested within days. In November 2002, both Reginald and Jonathan Carr were convicted of capital murder and dozens of related charges: kidnapping, rape, robbery, animal cruelty. They'd shot the victim's dog. Both sentenced to death. Then came the appeals. In 2014, the Kansas Supreme Court vacated the death sentences over penalty phase jury instruction issues. But in 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court reinstated them in an 8-1 decision in Kansas v. Carr. Subsequent appeals in 2022 and 2024 failed. As of 2025, both brothers remain on death row at El Dorado Correctional Facility. Execution dates unscheduled, but inevitable. One survivor brought down an empire of violence. One metal barrette and one woman's refusal to die turned what the Carr brothers thought would be a crime without witnesses into the most ironclad prosecution Kansas had seen in decades. We're almost there. But first, are you subscribed? If not, do it now. This kind of storytelling doesn't happen by accident. Hit that button and let's keep building this. Richmond, Virginia, 1979. For 8 months, the city lived in fear. Random murders, victims selected for no reason beyond opportunity. A couple set on fire in their own home. A teenage boy bludgeoned to death in an alley. A local disc jockey, Johnny G. Gallagher, abducted from his apartment and executed on a roadside. Elderly couples shot in their living rooms while watching television. The violence had no pattern, no logic, no warning. Just 3 brothers, Linwood, James, and Anthony Briley, plus their accomplice Duncan Meekins, treating murder like a recreational activity. October 19th, 1979. The killing reached its apex. Harvey Wilkerson, his pregnant wife Judy, and her 5-year-old son were tied up in their home, robbed, and executed. Judy was pregnant. They killed her anyway. They killed a kindergartner. Because in the Briley calculus, witnesses were inconvenient and human life was worthless. Duncan Meekins broke first, cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for avoiding execution. His testimony unraveled everything. Linwood and James Briley received death sentences in 1980. Anthony, the youngest, received multiple life terms. Then, in May 1984, something unprecedented happened. Linwood and James, along with 4 other death row inmates, engineered an escape from Mecklenburg Correctional Center, the only successful death row escape in Virginia history. They disguised themselves in stolen guards' uniforms, sparked a manufactured riot as distraction, and walked out through controlled doors using fake credentials. For 19 days, Virginia held its breath. FBI and U.S. Marshals launched a multi-state manhunt. The Brileys were finally cornered in Philadelphia. Linwood was executed by electric chair on October 12, 1984, just months after his recapture. James followed on April 18, 1985. Anthony remains incarcerated, denied parole repeatedly, spending his decades behind bars, while Richmond tries to forget the 8 months when going outside after dark felt like rolling dice with your life. Chaos has no logic. The Briley brothers didn't kill for money or revenge or even twisted ideology. They killed because they could, because it made them feel powerful, because 3 brothers decided that together they were untouchable. Spoiler, they weren't. But we're not done yet. Because some cases transcend regional horror and become international symbols of everything that can go wrong when love turns predatory. We're almost there. But first, are you subscribed? If not, do it now. This kind of documentaries doesn't happen by accident. Toronto, 1987. Paul Bernardo looked like a young accountant, clean-cut, handsome, the kind of guy parents would approve of. Carla Homolka looked like the girl next door, blonde, bubbly, working at a veterinary clinic. When they met, friends called them Ken and Barbie. Picture-perfect couple. Future wedding announcement material. Except Paul was already the Scarborough rapist. responsible for at least 14 violent sexual assaults. And Carla? She didn't just tolerate his darkness, she fed it. December 23rd, 1990. Carla's 5-year-old sister Tammy is home for Christmas. Carla steals veterinary sedatives from her clinic and drugs her own sister. Then she and Paul rape Tammy on videotape. Tammy chokes on her own vomit and dies. The death is ruled accidental. The family grieves. Carla and Paul get away with it. For a while. June 1991. 4-year-old Leslie Mahaffey is abducted, held captive for days, tortured on camera, murdered, dismembered with a circular saw, her body parts encased in concrete and dumped in a lake. April 1992. 5-year-old Kristen French is grabbed in broad daylight, driven to Paul and Carla's house, subjected to days of sexual torture, all recorded on video, then strangled and dumped. Carla eventually leaves Paul after he beats her badly enough that she ends up in the hospital. She cuts a deal with prosecutors before they find the videotapes, testify against Paul, plead guilty to manslaughter, serve 12 years. The prosecution thinks she's a battered victim. Then they find the tapes. The videos show Carla wasn't coerced. She was enthusiastic, participating, orchestrating. But the deal was already signed. The deal with the devil, Canadian media called it. And the system had to honor it. Paul Bernardo was convicted in 1995 of first-degree murder, declared a dangerous offender, and sentenced to life in maximum security confinement. In 2023, his transfer to medium security ignited national outrage. Victims' families protested, petitions circulated, politicians scrambled. Multiple parole bids have been denied. As of 2025, he remains behind the highest walls Canada has. Carla Homolka walked out of prison in 2005 after serving her full sentence, changed her name, moved to Quebec, remarried, had children. She's living free right now, while the families of Tammy, Leslie, and Kristen live with permanent loss. The system can fail survivors twice. Once when the crime happens, and again when justice feels incomplete. Now flip back to 1977. Los Angeles. Women are being found on hillsides, overlooking freeways, raped, tortured, strangled, their bodies staged like displays. The media dubs the killer the Hillside Strangler, singular, because nobody imagines it could be two people working in perfect coordination. Angelo Buono, 42, ran an upholstery shop in Glendale. Kenneth Bianchi, 26, was his cousin. Together, they posed as undercover police officers, flashing fake badges, pulling over young women, offering help that turned into captivity. They'd take victims to Angelo's shop, bind them, rape them, torture them, strangle them with ligatures, then dump the bodies where they'd be found quickly. The placement was deliberate. They wanted the fear to spread. 10 victims between October 1977 and February 1978. Ages 12 to 28. The killings stopped suddenly when Kenneth moved to Bellingham, Washington. Investigators thought maybe the strangler had died or been imprisoned for something else. Then, in January 1979, 2 college students in Bellingham are murdered. Same M.O., same ligature marks. Kenneth Bianchi is arrested after leaving a trail of evidence that would embarrass a first-year criminology student. He tries to fake multiple personality disorder, even steals a psychologist's identity to back up his claims. It doesn't work. Facing death, Kenneth makes a deal: testify against Angelo, avoid execution. Blood is thicker than water until lethal injection is on the table. Then loyalty evaporates. In 1983, Angelo Buono was convicted of 9 murders and sentenced to life without parole. He died of a heart attack in prison in 2002. Kenneth received multiple life sentences for 7 murders. He's filed parole petitions repeatedly. They've been denied every single time. He'll die in prison, just like his cousin did, except Angelo took his secrets to the grave, while Kenneth sold his soul and his family for a few more years of breathing. Sometimes the betrayal isn't the crime. But here's the thing: that's just one case, one couple, One nightmare in a catalogue of family bonds that turned into bloodstains. What happens when the people you're supposed to trust become the ones you should fear most? When a grandmother keeps a handwritten list of her husband's victims? When brothers choreograph an execution in a snowy field? When parents eliminate an entire family to win a custody battle? 10 families, decades of horror. Some became legends, others were nearly forgotten, but every single one proves that blood doesn't always protect. Sometimes it kills. Before we dive in, drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from? Let's build this community. Because here's what most people don't understand about family killers: they're different. When a lone psychopath strikes, we can rationalize it. One broken mind, one deviant. But when two people, bound by love, or blood, or both, decide to kill together, that's not madness, that's conspiracy. That's collusion. That's trust weaponized in the most terrifying way possible. Psychologists call it folie à deux, a madness shared by two. But that clinical term doesn't capture the full horror. When two people kill together, they don't just double the damage. They create an echo chamber where the darkest impulses get validated, reinforced, amplified. One person might hesitate, might feel guilt, might back down, but add a partner? Suddenly, murder becomes a shared project, a bonding experience, proof of devotion. Think about it, we're hardwired to trust family. From the moment we're born, we depend on them for survival. We assume safety in numbers, especially when those numbers include people who share our DNA or our bed. That's the trust paradox. The very people who have the most access to us, the most knowledge of our vulnerabilities, the deepest claim on our loyalty, they're also the ones who can do the most damage if something goes wrong. And when it goes wrong with two or more people, the violence takes on a different character entirely. There's planning, coordination. One person scouts while the other strikes. One lures while the other kills. One holds the victim down while the other pulls the trigger. It's not heat of the moment rage, it's premeditated partnership. It's what comes after. 10 families, 10 different motives, a custody dispute, a bad check scheme, sexual sadism, patriarchal control, shared delusion, greed, thrill-seeking, paranoia, obsession, betrayal. But strip away the specifics, and one truth remains. These weren't strangers lurking in alleys. They were parents, siblings, lovers, partners, people bound by blood or vows, or both. People who were supposed to protect each other, or protect their victims. Faye Copeland kept a handwritten list. Carla Homolka drugged her own sister. The Wagner family manufactured silencers in their garage. Sabrina and Wiesem recorded their victims' forced confessions. These weren't crimes of opportunity, they were crimes of intimacy. Violence that required trust, access, and the kind of coordination that only comes when two or more people validate each other's worst impulses. But let's not forget the ones who survived. H.G., shot in the head, saved by a metal hair barrette, walked a mile through freezing snow while naked and bleeding to summon help. Her testimony put 2 brothers on death row. Jack McCormick witnessed a burial on the Copeland farm, and his escape triggered the investigation that ended a killing spree. Sophie Lyonette's memory forced Britain to reckon with coercive control laws and how psychological torture can be just as deadly as a weapon. These survivors and witnesses didn't just escape death. They dismantled empires of violence. They proved that even in the darkest conspiracies, one voice, one piece of evidence, one refusal to die can bring the whole structure crashing down. We spend our lives building walls to keep danger out. Locks on doors, security systems, neighborhood watch programs, stranger danger warnings. But what happens when the danger is already inside? When it shares your last name or your bed? When it knows your schedule, your vulnerabilities, your secrets? When trust itself becomes the weapon? That's the lesson here. Not that you should suspect everyone. Not that family is inherently dangerous. But that evil doesn't always announce itself with a mask and a knife. Sometimes it wears a grandmotherly apron. Sometimes it looks like young love. Sometimes it sits across from you at the dinner table. If this story affected you, share it. Comment below with your thoughts. Tell me which case disturbed you most, or if there's a family crime case you think deserves coverage. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. Hit that button. Because next week, we're diving into the psychology of cult leaders who convinced entire families to kill for them when charisma becomes control and devotion turns deadly. You won't want to miss it. Until then, stay safe. And remember, the people closest to you should be your protection, not your threat. When that equation flips, that's when blood bonds become bloodstains.